the metallic pop of a taser firing. Time fractured. She felt the sharp punch of electricity slam into her chest, stealing every breath, every thought. The world lurched sideways as her muscles seized beyond her control. The bags exploded from her arms, peaches and cans and eggs scattering like marbles across the driveway. In the sleepy town of Cedar Hollow, there was a man folks simply knew as Sam Whitaker, the man who could coax life back into any engine, no matter how stubborn. His small garage sat at the end of Sycamore Lane, its doors almost always open on weekends, as if inviting the whole world to wander by and catch the smell of warm motor oil. Hear the faint strains of old Delta blues floating from a dusty radio perched on the workbench. Sam was 69, but the years hadn't dulled the steady confidence in his hands. Those hands bore stories few could guess, stories not written in ink, but in scars and the slow, deliberate way he moved, as if he'd once known urgency so intimately that he no longer needed to rush anything ever again. To the neighbors, Sam was a fixture as familiar as the weathered oak tree that shaded the corner of the lot. They brought him their broken lawn mowers, their stubborn Chevys, the old tractors left behind by grandfathers. He fixed them all, often refusing payment, with a simple nod and a chuckle that said, "Don't worry about it, neighbor." What they didn't know, what they never asked, was who Sam had been before Cedar Hollow. 28 years serving in shadows most Americans never even knew existed. Missions without names, places without borders, medals folded away in a faded cigar box shoved under the workbench. Sam didn't display them. He never spoke of them. He believed real service wasn't a story you told. It was a life you lived quietly, day after day. Only Ellen, his wife of 44 years, knew the full weight of that history. She had waded through long deployments, endured nights broken by nightmares he couldn't explain. She had stood by him when he tried to piece together a civilian life brick by slow brick long after the uniform had been packed away for good. Their small ranch house wasn't grand by any measure, but it was sanctuary, a place where engines found second chances and two people carved out a world of simple grace and hard-earned peace. That afternoon the world felt as it always had. The sun slanted low through the trees, casting long golden beams across the driveway. Sam lay beneath Mrs. Abbott's Buick, changing her oil as a favor, wiping sweat and engine grease from his brow. Ellen had driven to the market for the Wednesday senior discount, a small ritual, a tiny blessing they both still smiled about. The breeze carried the crispness of early autumn, the smell of cut grass, of burning leaves somewhere far off. Everything ordinary, everything safe. Until it wasn't. The screech of tires sliced through the afternoon stillness, sharp and foreign. Sam's head jerked toward the street just as the first black SUV lurched into the driveway, heavy and wrong against the quiet rhythm of Cedar Hollow 3. More followed, slamming to halts in a cloud of dust and hard edges. Doors flew open. Men poured out, weapons raised, voices, barking commands that shattered the air. Get on the ground. Hands where we can see them. Sam rolled out from under the Buick slowly, his movements deliberate, hands spread where everyone could see them. The habits of another lifetime resurfaced instantly, reflexive and clear. He didn't argue, didn't resist. He knew better than anyone how fast fear could trigger a mistake, how fragile life became under a nervous finger twitching on a trigger. He opened his mouth to speak, to say there must be a mistake, but a rifle barrel gestured him into silence. Concrete met his cheek as he was pushed down knees, aching against the rough driveway. Zip ties bit into his wrists. Boots moved around him, impersonal and urgent. Through the haze of barked orders and crackling radios, Sam heard one command rise above the chaos. "Secure the house." His heart tightened, not from fear for himself. He had made peace with danger long ago, but from a single piercing thought. Ellen. She would be home any minute, and she would walk straight into this storm. And this time, Sam couldn't be the shield she deserved to have Ellen Whitaker turned onto Sycamore Lane like she had 1,000 times before, the familiar rattle of groceries shifting in the back seat of her aging sedan. The radio hummed softly, with a song from decades past, one that still made her smile without thinking. It was a simple afternoon, Senior discount day at Miller's Market had been kind, and she was already thinking about what Sam might say when she showed him the perfect peaches she'd found. She had no idea. As she pulled into the driveway, her eyes caught the seen black SUVs, sprawled across the yard, men in armor rifles, drawn a knot of noise and violence where peace should have been. She saw Sam first face down on the concrete, his body still, his hands bound behind him. Her heart lurched so hard, she nearly forgot how to breathe. She opened the car door with trembling fingers, stepping out cautiously, instinctively, cradling the grocery bags against her chest like some fragile shield. Right now she called, confusion thick in her voice. Several heads snapped toward her weapons, following a heartbeat later. "Drop the bags, hands where we can see them." The order slammed into her like a gust of winter air. She froze, blinking into the blinding glare of afternoon sun, bouncing off their helmets and shields. She wasn't refusing. She just didn't understand. Her mind raced, trying to fit this madness into something sensible. She started, but the words tangled and died. The bags were heavy. Arthritis gnawed at her joints on good days, and today was not a good day. She tried to lower them, but her movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of slow that gets mistaken for defiance when adrenaline is pumping and fingers hover too close to triggers. "She's not complying," a young officer barked, voice cracking from the strain of nerves he couldn't quite conceal. "Ma'am, final warning," another shouted, each syllable sharper than the last. Ellen, bewildered, tried again to set the bags down, the paper crinkling loudly in the dead silence between barked commands. Eggs shifted inside a gallon of milk, teetered dangerously. And then the metallic pop of a taser firing. Time fractured. She felt the sharp punch of electricity slam into her chest, stealing every breath, every thought. The world lurched sideways as her muscles seized beyond her control. The bags exploded from her arms, peaches and cans and eggs scattering like marbles across the driveway. She hit the ground hard, her body folding like a rag doll, milk pooling under her hip, soaking into the denim of her jeans. Somewhere beyond the tunnel of static roaring in her ears, she thought she heard Sam's voice, not shouting, not begging, but clear and cutting through the chaos like a blade. "She's my wife. She's just carrying groceries." But boots pinned him down harder, drowning out whatever answer he might have given. Helen lay still, her face against the warm concrete, trying desperately to drag air back into her lungs. Her mind spun confusion, mixing with pain, shame, mixing with fear. This wasn't a mistake you could apologize for. This wasn't a misunderstanding, easily undone. Somewhere deep inside, a part of her began to crack, not from the pain, not even from the terror, but from the simple, soul-deep realization. They didn't see her. Not as a woman, not as a neighbor, not even as a human being carrying a week's worth of groceries home to her husband. To them she was just a threat to be neutralized. And in that shattering moment, something inside Ellen Whitaker, something soft and trusting, withered away forever. Sam struggled against the weight pressing between his shoulder blades, but he didn't thrash, he didn't curse. He knew too well that sudden movements could turn misunderstanding into tragedy in the blink of an eye. The boots shifted around him. Commands flew, terse, clipped, urgent. Radios buzzed and snapped somewhere in the swirl of confusion. He caught the order. "Secure the house." His heart clenched tighter. "Ellen, dear God, Ellen." He lifted his head slightly enough to see her lying crumpled a few yards away, grocery bags torn open around her like the wreckage of something precious and irreplaceable. His soul ached to go to her, to gather her up, to shield her, as he had always promised he would. But zip ties bit into his wrists, and armed men still shouted over one another, not seeing, not thinking, just reacting. One officer, young and jittery, sneered down at him, "Step back, old man, or you're next." Sam said nothing. No anger, no plea, only silence steady and measured heavier than any shouted protest. Slowly, painfully, the world seemed to slow around him, as if time itself held its breath. In that stillness, Sam turned his eyes toward the man wearing the commander's insignia, not the loudest voice, not the angriest, but the one whose hesitation mattered. Sam's voice, when it came, was calm, not loud, but carved from stone. Call General Ford right now. 5 words. 5 words spoken with the certainty of a man who knew exactly what they meant and who he was saying them to. For a beat, nobody moved. Radios crackled. Boots scuffed against concrete. Somewhere a crow called out from a telephone wire overhead, oblivious to the weight suddenly hanging in the humid afternoon air. The commander's face shifted barely, but Sam saw it. Confusion first, then suspicion, then something else, recognition. Maybe, or at least the gut-deep instinct that told seasoned men when they'd made a very big mistake. One of the younger officers snorted dismissively. "That's supposed to scare us, old man. We're executing a warrant. Carlos Mendez high-value target." Sam's gaze didn't flicker. "This is 742 Maple Drive." He said voice, even as a river current. "You want 742 Maple Lane? Different zip code? You're in the wrong house." The commander stiffened. He motioned to one of his team, jerking his head sharply. "Check it!" The officer bolted back to one of the SUVs, fumbling with a tablet, barking into the radio. Sam lowered his head again, resting it gently against the warm, rough driveway. He wasn't defeated. He was waiting with the patience of a man who had spent entire nights lying motionless in jungle mud, listening for dangers he couldn't yet see. Minutes crawled by. Then a low murmur crackled over the radios, and every officer who heard it froze. Wrong house, wrong man, wrong everything. Sam felt the shift in the air before anyone spoke. It rippled outward in a silent wave, a heavy realization sinking into every helmeted head on that driveway. They hadn't captured a criminal. They hadn't made the community safer. They had zip-tied a man who had written the rules they were supposed to live by. The commander strode toward Sam, voice tighter now. "Left inside pocket," Sam said simply before the man could ask. "Look, but don't touch." With a hesitance that hadn't been there 15 minutes ago, the commander reached carefully into Sam's jacket pocket and withdrew a small, battered badge. A black eagle embossed against a field of silver, a symbol few civilians had ever seen, but one every veteran of classified operations would recognize without question. The commander paled, his hand dropped to his side. He barked out an order that cracked like thunder. Medic now cut him loose. As the plastic bindings snapped away and Sam's arms fell free, he rolled his shoulders once to work out the stiffness, then pushed himself upright. He moved first to Ellen, cradling her gently with hands that had steadied rifles and carried wounded brothers in arms across burning fields. His voice, though low, was clear enough for every man standing there to hear. "You didn't verify your target. You escalated without cause, and you hurt a woman carrying nothing more dangerous than a carton of eggs." Across the street, a neighbor watched from behind a curtain, phone in hand. Later, the video would show something few people ever forgot. One old man, 5 quiet words, and an entire SWAT team standing down. The minutes that followed stretched out like a slow-moving storm over Cedar Hollow. The SWAT officers shuffled uneasily radios, hissing with clipped confirmations of their mistake. Across the driveway, Ellen sat propped against Sam's chest, a blanket now draped across her shoulders, by a neighbor who had dared to step closer when the shouting had stopped. The commander's helmet came off first, as if the weight of it had suddenly become too heavy. His face was pale under the afternoon sun, his mouth pressed into a hard, thin line. He stood there hollowed out by realization, watching as a medic checked Ellen's pulse and carefully wiped the blood from a scrape on her cheek. Then came the low rumble of a heavy engine. All eyes turned toward the corner of Sycamore Lane as a black SUV rolled into view. No sirens, no lights, just deliberate purpose. It pulled up behind the police cruisers with a kind of silent authority that made even the most defiant officer instinctively straighten his spine. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. General James Ford didn't wear a uniform. He didn't need to. Authority clung to him the way dust clings to a boot that's walked too many hard miles. His silver hair was trimmed close, his charcoal gray suit crisp, even in the heavy heat. He took a moment standing beside the SUV, surveying the broken groceries, the rattled officers, the man kneeling beside a bruised wife. Then he moved, not fast, not with anger, but with the slow, certain steps of a man who had made more decisions under fire than any of these officers would in a lifetime. Sam stood to meet him, helping Ellen settle gently against the porch railing. The two men regarded each other across a few feet of battered concrete, a space crowded with decades of memory, shared missions, silent promises made long ago under very different skies. Without a word, General Ford raised his hand in a salute sharp flawless, filled with the kind of respect that can't be ordered or bought. Sam returned it, his movements slower, the stiffness in his joints betraying the years, but the dignity of it shining through, untouched. It was the first salute Sam Whitaker had given in 15 years. "They told me you were gone," Ford said finally, his voice low but carrying. Sam's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Only officially," he said, with a dry rasp of humor. Ford's gaze shifted past him to Ellen, bruised but upright, and something hardened behind his eyes. When he turned back to the assembled officers, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in his words landed like thunder without ever needing to roar. "This man," Ford said, gesturing toward Sam, "wrote the civilian engagement protocols you were supposed to follow." A visible shudder ran through the assembled team. The commander's shoulders sagged a fraction, the truth carving deep lines into his face. Ford continued methodical and merciless in his quiet recitation. "You didn't verify your address. You escalated against a non-threat. You deployed force against a civilian carrying groceries." His gaze fell on the young officer who had fired the taser. "Where's the one who pulled the trigger?" The young man, barely out of his academy years, stepped forward, trembling. Without ceremony, Ford spoke 4 words that cut deeper than any lecture. "Remove your equipment now." The young officer stripped off his tactical vest, his sidearm, his badge, one by one, laying them on the hood of a patrol car with shaking hands. He stood there afterward, stripped not only of his gear but of the certainty he had carried into that driveway an hour ago. Ford turned back to Sam, then reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrawing a thick sealed envelope. "This," he said, extending it, "is a formal apology from the department and an invitation we need men like you again." Sam took the envelope in his scarred hands but didn't open it. He didn't need to. He just looked toward Ellen, her hand resting lightly against the porch rail, her bruises already darkening under the skin. "My service belongs somewhere else now," Sam said quietly. "It belongs here." Ford nodded, once the ghost of a smile touching his weathered features. "The offer stands," he said simply, and without waiting for a reply, the general turned, walked back to the waiting SUV, and was gone, leaving behind only dust silence and the long shadow of what real respect looked like. Life in Cedar Hollow didn't return to normal after that day. Not exactly. Some moments change the air itself. They leave a scent behind a heaviness you can't quite explain even after the noise has faded. For Sam and Ellen Whitaker, the days moved forward slow and deliberate, like stepping carefully across cracked ice. Ellen's bruises faded, though the ache beneath them lingered longer. She never spoke much about what had happened. Not the fall, not the taser, not the humiliation of being mistaken for something she had never been. But there was a new steel in the way she carried herself now, a lift in her chin when she walked into Miller's Market, a steady gaze when she passed a patrol car on the road. Sam noticed so did the town. Neighbors waved longer now. Kids who once sped their bikes past the Whitaker driveway without a second glance now nodded solemnly when they pedaled by. Patrol cars drove slower down Sycamore Lane. Officers tipped their hats first, now with a respect that didn't come from fear, but from understanding. Sometimes a black SUV would appear without announcement. A discreet figure would leave a package on the porch, a worn history book, a good bottle of Kentucky bourbon, a photograph carefully restored. Sam standing shoulder to shoulder with men whose faces were blurred beyond recognition, captured in the kind of brotherhood words could never quite reach. But Sam never boasted, never reminded anyone. He went back to what he had always done, fixing engines too stubborn to start teaching kids, too stubborn to sit still, coaxing life out of the forgotten things people left behind. That was Sam Whitaker's true gift, not what he had once done in distant classified places, but what he did here quietly stitching broken pieces together, whether it was a crankshaft, a rusty bicycle, or a young boy's trust in second chances. 3 months after the incident, a rookie officer's cruiser sputtered and died right in front of the Whitaker home. The young man popped the hood, swore under his breath, and froze when he saw Sam walking down the driveway with a toolbox in hand. Sam didn't say much, just motioned for the boy to move aside, peered into the tangle of belts and hoses, and set to work. Under the shade of the maple trees, elbow deep in grease, the officer finally worked up the courage to ask. "Sir Hart," he said, voice low and unsure, "at the academy they told us about what happened here. They said you could have ended careers that day, made sure half the department never wore a badge again. Why didn't you—" Sam tightened a bolt before answering. His voice was as steady as ever, but there was something older beneath it, something worn smooth by time and loss. "Because revenge doesn't fix engines," he said, wiping his hands clean on a rag, "and it doesn't fix people either." The cruiser rumbled back to life on the first turn of the key. The young officer looked at him, something like reverence in his eyes. "Thank you, sir." Sam smiled a slow, weathered smile that spoke of 1,000 battles fought in silence. "Call me Sam," he said, "just Sam." A few days later, a local reporter cornered Sam outside the VFW hall, microphone in hand, camera crew hovering eagerly behind. "Mr. Whitaker," she asked, breathless, "why didn't you fight back that day? You had the training, you had the right. Why only 5 words?" Sam met her gaze without blinking. His voice, when it came, was low and even like the last notes of a song no one wanted to end. "Because 5 words," he said, "were louder than fear." He turned then, walking slowly back to his old truck, the same truck he had rebuilt piece by piece, the same truck he refused to give up even when newer, shinier things came along. Because some things you build carefully, some things you protect quietly. And some things like dignity, like respect, like quiet strength, you simply never let anyone take away. Not ever. My name's James, and like Sam, I wore the uniform once. I carried the weight of silence, the weight of service, and the lessons you only learn when you stand between the world and the things it doesn't want to face. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of the power of patience, of dignity, of choosing restraint when the world demands rage, I would truly love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections down below. I read every word, and your stories matter more than you know. If you believe, like I do, that real strength doesn't need to shout, if you believe the world still needs stories about quiet courage and quiet honor, then I invite you to subscribe to the channel. That's what we're building here, a place where stories of quiet strength still have a voice. And if you found meaning here today, a simple like helps more folks find their way to stories that lift us up instead of tear us down. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until we meet again, walk steady, speak quietly, and remember, sometimes 5 words can change everything.